Armand here to discuss the aspect of the year for 2019, and that is the Saturn Neptune sextile. And you're saying to yourself a couple of things. First of all, you're saying sextile sounds to me porting aspect, not necessarily the lead aspect for the year. And the second thing you're saying is, well, don't we usually award awards at the end of the year rather than beforehand? Well, you got some good points there. Or I have some good points there that I made for you. And yet I still feel that the Saturn-Neptune aspect is the big aspect of the year. And let's think about why. First of all, it's Saturn and Neptune, and that is pretty significant. Also, I kind of did want to give them a little shout out at the beginning of the year so that they can, it will encourage them, let's put it that way. Okay, so Saturn and Neptune. When Saturn and Neptune are in aspect to each other, we have a really kind of interesting and sort of dicey situation. Saturn represents our structures of society. It represents those determinants, the things we know, the things that we're sure are real. Neptune tends to dissolve and fog and take apart the boundaries of things. So when we have Saturn and Neptune together, what we find is that we change our view of what reality is. That's especially true at the conjunctions, but it happens anytime there's an aspect, including a soft little sextile down at the end of the cycle, which is where we are now. So no matter where it occurs or what aspect occurs, it's always the same general pattern. As Saturn approaches Neptune, our reality begins to show some holes and kind of dissolves, and there's a point there where Saturn is right next to Neptune, probably for about a year, and there's a lot of porousness, there's a lot of uncertainty. And then, as Saturn moves past Neptune, our reality recongeals in a new form, and we wind up having taken in from that experience new things that become the new normal rather quickly, and we sort of go forward from that point. It's especially powerful at the conjunctions, as I said, and we're going to modify that every time we get to another aspect along the way. Here's an example or two. Well, actually, this is an important part of the whole story. In the 1952 conjunction, we were at the point of really dividing the world by the Iron Curtain. The new reality became the world divided. Okay, there was East and West. And that was the dominant thought throughout the next 30 years, well, throughout the next 37 years, because that's the cycle lasts about 36 years. That was the dominant reality for that time. And Saturn-Neptune has a lot to do with what we perceive as being our reality. Now, we act on the basis of what we perceive to be our reality, so it's not like this is just some sort of, fanciful type of thing, but it is kind of the fashion of the way we think. So, from 1952 to 1989, we have the world divided in two. That was the basis for Vietnam War. That was the basis for just about every political campaign in the United States and Europe. That was the basis for policy in the Middle East, in Central America, and in South America. That was the dominant reality. That was the perceived dominant reality. Then in 1989, with Uranus also in the mix, Saturn and Neptune met in Capricorn, and that reality evaporated. The Berlin Wall came down, the Soviet Union broke up, all sorts of things happened that we had thought for 36 years seemed absolutely impossible, happened very, very quickly, and we were left to reconstruct a new reality. Is the 1989 conjunction. Now, the aspects have gone on since then. It's an interesting story, but it's not interesting. It is not interesting enough to take your time right now. The last time there was a major aspect, though, was in 2016 when Saturn squared Neptune. And this was a point in time when our reality shifted quite a bit. The two big things that I would point out from that time, they're by no means the only thing that we could point out, but two things that would really be important for that period of time would be the Brexit vote and the election of Donald Trump, both of which seemed highly improbable improbable coming into 2016, and by the end of the year, they were accomplished. That happened, right? So we're looking at a real shift in our reality at that time. It relates to 1989 because we're talking about how do we reconstruct reality and how do we, worm our way through this entire cycle. Um, Importantly, during that period of time when things are kind of dissolved, when the structures or the boundaries, the Saturnian boundaries of reality are dissolved, what happens is that new ideas come in, they sort of seep in from the ether. They're often met with a great deal of skepticism and fear and paranoia. 1952, for example, we would have the McCarthy era. It's also a time when, just depending upon how things are going, and when in 2016 Saturn was in Sagittarius, very much about beliefs and somewhat polarizing sign. You can get some very strong belief systems coming in that maybe trump out. I actually did that by accident. Actually trump out facts and more reasonable approaches to things. Okay, that was 2016. So as we get to 2019, and we have this Saturn Neptune sextile, this soft sextile that represents a little more than just potential, we find that there's actually a good chance of pushing the reality of 2016, and to an extent the reality of 1989, into at least a slightly different direction. This aspect, the first time it manifests is on January 31st, hence this video. Then it happens again in June, and then it happens in early November. But really, honestly, because of the different trigger aspects and so on, you can look at this aspect as being in place all year long. The reality that we congealed in 2016 is softened a bit. It's softened a bit. We can push it in different directions at this time. There are potentials for change at this particular point in time. Now, and if you want to explore those potentials for change, you'd have to look at all of the different planets and aspects. You'd have to look at, say, Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn. You'd have to look at Uranus going into Taurus. There's a lot of potential out there. Now, in the most recent e-news, NCGR e-news, you probably read it because you're an NCGR member, right? You really should be, because you get great stuff. I wrote essentially this talk as an article, and in the same edition, David Perloff wrote about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is the new maverick member of Congress that is getting out there and really shaking things up. And when was she born? She was born in 1989. So she is exactly an exemplar of that energy brought into this time, brought into 2019, which is the closing sextile of the cycle. So she's out there as that kind of maverick energy from the conjunction, and she's showing up here at the end of the cycle. It's important. It's the end of the cycle, and you think, well, at the end of a cycle, you really can't do that much. You certainly can't rewrite the last 30 years, that's for sure. But you can push things in a direction that you kind of want them to go, particularly with an eye towards the next cycle. And the next cycle begins in 2026, when Saturn and Neptune meet at the very beginning of Aries. If you think about it, we're going to want to get that one right, because that sounds to me like it's a potentially liberating, potentially exciting aspect. It sounds to me also like it is a particularly likely to be somewhat belligerent aspect, and we don't want that to happen. So, yes, the Saturn-Neptune cycle is the aspect of the year for 2019. It is an opportunity for us to move the discourse in a different direction. Yeah, there's going to be some paranoia that floats in. There's always some paranoia that floats in when you have Saturn and Neptune together, because you can't maintain the boundaries. You're not sure what's real. But at the same time, greater ideas for Neptune and Pisces, greater ideas for compassion, for universality, for opening us up to greater possibilities, for dissolving the boundaries that separate us. Those things are all there. And hopefully, we'll do something with them.